So now we have a number of people who are going to join a panel, people who really have a lot of experience in this field, and just ask them to start by commenting on what we've heard so far and what we need to be doing more in the future. So, Sue, would you kick off with your response to what you've heard so far?
Well, I think it really falls in line with both what the left thinking is and what the SB thinking is, and I have to be very careful here because there is a mayoral election, so some of the things I can't comment on as a London Let member. Technically, as of 2 days ago, I was officially sort of stood down as a London Let member as the new mayoral election team's coming over. But it is completely in line with everything that's about both groups. We're very, very keen to, business is changing, the way we do business is changing. Cost of office space now is such a premium in a business, and making doing business in London so expensive. People are looking at smarter ways of how they can use space, whether that's actually splitting the company, using co-working space and having some of it in London and somewhere else, some outside. If it's actually being flexible and having some home working and having teams coming in different ways. People are changing the way they do business. The one thing businesses are very good at is being agile, of making the best of whatever is happening to them at the time. And London at the moment now is becoming so expensive to be a business in hard costs. And the only other place that businesses have to go to is actually employment costs to save money. Because you can't charge more as a London business because you just lose the business to somebody outside of London who won't be charging the same as you for doing the same product or whatever it is you're creating. So businesses are changing the way they're doing work. It's also being forced upon them because of permitted development rights. This is a major issue when you're talking places like Kingston losing 70% of their commercial space with all the permissions that would, if they've been granted, actually go ahead. Where are those businesses going to go to? What we don't want to become is a Paris where everybody's living in the centre and having to commute out for their work, because that would not be the vibrant London we know and love. And I sat in a presentation for the West End Centre, West End Community, I don't know what they're called now, but one of the West End development groups, and they were saying, Soho can move to Paddington. Businesses in Soho don't want to move to Paddington. They want to be, as you said, the live-life balance. They've worked out where their businesses should be. And to force migration like that just isn't on. So I think we need a very grown-up decision in London. What do we want to be? Do we want to be a Paris that's going to be a dormitory city with everybody commuting out? If that's not what we want, then we have to make some very, very big decisions and very quickly.
Thank you very much. Matthew?
I just wanted to highlight something about local government, which I think a trend's been emerging pretty strongly over the last couple of years. And so Sara and Clare have talked about pressure that's being put on the mayor at a regional level, but I think it's worth noting that at council levels, increasingly leaders and cabinet members at councils are really getting strongly behind the Workspace agenda. I think despite being frustrated by permitted development rights, you're seeing economic development teams, regeneration teams working with planners increasingly to do whatever they can, whether that's using existing planning policy hooks to promote new spaces or safeguard spaces, focusing their fundraising efforts on this agenda. I think you're seeing a lot, when things like the London Regeneration Fund come round, you're seeing many more councils now pitching to put resources into Workspace projects, whereas previously it might have been more focused on kind of one-to-one business support type activities. And I think many councils that I know are having a good look at their own assets as well. As I know certainly in Lambeth, we're giving over spaces in Loughborough Junction to Workspace projects. We've got a brief out there for meanwhile space opportunities in Lower Marsh. We've used a car park already in Brixton for a major scheme called Pop Brixton. So I think despite the kind of the frustration with permitted development rights, there is a lot to celebrate at the moment, and there is a lot going on. So I think apart from that, it's a good time to be involved in the sector.
Thank you very much. Michael?
Yeah, so what's the benefit of open workspace provision to a community, to a place? I think, to get the answer to that question, I think first of all we need to step back and think about the kind of people who are in our spaces. So a year ago, Boarts opened 90 studio spaces in Wapping in the former News International headquarters, St George development, and we've got studio spaces in there. So last year that space opened. Last week, a group of the artists and creatives in there finished making the puppets for Michael Morpurgo, he of Warhorse, the playwright and so on, for his next production. Next door to him, Kit, in a very small space working on a Mac, is designing fashion textiles that's been sold into New York, into Tokyo, into Paris. So the question is, how does the presence of that kind of community benefit a place? And I think the disaster, bluntly, that we found is that if that all happens behind a closed door, practically, we know that the presence of artists in Hackney Wick make it possible for Here East to contemplate moving digital companies over to East London away from Old Street. So we know there's that kind of presence that plays in the sector. But for a neighbourhood and for a place, residents don't necessarily read it that way. What we found is that, in practically looking at jobs for our artists and the kind of work that you can get into to survive over that long period after you leave college, then providing public goods is a really good source of work. And so for us, placing an artist into St Paul's Way School, was part of that school's journey towards turning from being a failing school in Poplar to becoming one of the top performing schools in the country in its arts provision. That provided a job for one of our artists. It worked so well that we set up a department, and now we have artists working in 90 schools across London. So there is a possibility to leverage the kind of skills in our community to make that kind of relationship. I could tell you the same story in relation to public artworks, to interventions in landscape and so on. So come and look at the underpasses under the A12 between Poplar and Bow School at the moment, and you'll see the impact of our presence. And so I think that none of that stuff happens spontaneously. It has to be built on, but there are all kinds of opportunities to leverage the presence of a creative community in relation to local neighbourhoods, and that's what I think that the convergence agenda for East London is all about.
Thank you very much. James.
Workspace Group PLC. We're a PropCo and an OpCo FTSE 250 real estate investment trust, and we look at how we can convert buildings that were built for original different purpose, be they biscuit factories, leather markets, into business space that supports new and growing companies. And one of the things we started probably about 8 years ago as part of this was to create a business called Club Workspace. And whereas in the core portfolio it's very much about providing small studio office space, circa sort of 500 square feet up to maybe 5,000 square feet on short flexible leasing to bring people into the business space, we started to think about, well, actually, how do we create a membership basis? Because we know that a huge part of our business is about how all our customers in our business space start to intertrade. And some of the research that we've done with the University of Cambridge is that intertrading really drives the growth of the small businesses, the growing companies in the portfolio, and around 15% of sales and transactions of our customers are made to each other. So how do we start to think about what is the value of open workspace? And indeed, when we have our colleagues come over from Milan or Amsterdam, they view the entire model, the co-working space, the club, the membership model, where you just pay by credit card and walk into any of the business spaces and drop in and have a desk or be prepared to work on a flexible floor plate, integrating with the entire business model of the customers, the tenants in effect in the main business space. They view the whole thing as open workspace. So I think there's a bit of a challenge as to how we start to define our own space. But fundamentally, the way we are viewing it is that co-working space, club space, is an integral part of the entire offer of small business space, full stop, in London. And fundamentally, a key element is expected now by customers and prospects when they walk into the building, just like they expect to see meeting rooms, they expect to see open workspace as part of the wider offer. And I think there's an issue around what is a sustainable co-working space. How do you fundamentally integrate that into a model that allows you to see progression as companies naturally grow and move to different types of working space?
Thank you very much. So, you commented and Claire commented on the fact of need for support either from development community or from local authorities or from the LEP. I mean, that's a commercial operation which is delivering workspace for people. Does that not satisfy the requirement of the market, as it were, delivering in the way that we've just heard? To Sarah.
It really depends what you mean by the market and now, because probably if I'd sat here about 6 months ago when I was imagining that my next rent review with my landlord would be in the region of about 200 to 250%, I'd be sat here probably confident about just how great Bootstrap's underlying business model is, as a lot of businesses in our workspaces are. But when the market goes to the point where your landlord comes to you for a 500% rent increase, then you find that that level of intensity, like hockey stick rent increase, is just not, it may be in your risk register and it may have been considered, but actually, like my robust business model testing said, like, okay, I'll test up to 300%. And so I think both for the business environment of the businesses in our workspaces and for us as workspace providers, that concept of where market rent is at is a really, really large issue. And I know from the conversations I have when I do rent reviews that there's no point us having businesses in our workspace who we give 40 years of support to, because they're not a business. They have had 40 years of support, and what's that for? To what end? But in terms of workspace providers, there is a market that we can go into, that we can deal with without any need for market subsidy. We can buy a very expensive building, we can rent it out to people who can afford to pay very expensive rent, we can probably just about make a margin. The question is, although that's fine for us, and that's fine for those people, what's the actual economic impact of that on London? And it's that certain types of people will never start up their own business because the risk cost is too high for them. It's untenable to imagine. And that will be very likely to relate to their gender, to their race, to their background, who they are and where they were born. And what Bootstrap believes, and what many of the other workspace providers believe, is that if you can just reduce that cost of entry in the very beginning and create a fertile environment, that many more people have the chance for their business idea to get out of the bedroom and to have a go at succeeding. Now, if you're constantly, for the next 15, 20, 30 years, having to support those businesses, they're not real businesses. But they may be a particular sector that you feel needs to be and deserves to be in London. So everybody's talked about the East End and making whole swathes of the East End are named after things that were brought there or things that were made there. And that's part of the very fabric of London. And now, because of the way that the market's changed and the prices shift, we can't do that anymore. Does that mean that we give up on people whose background it is and whose skills and training it is to make things? Do we uproot those people and move them? We just said we can't bear to go from Soho to Paddington. How on earth can we bear to go from the East End up to Rutland or wherever else? And so there are certain types of people who I think deserve a fair level playing field and an opportunity to get started in life. And Open Workspace can do that. And there are certain ages of business that I think deserve a fair and open playing field. And in order to deliver the subsidy for those two types of people and those types of sectors, somebody has to be subsidising Open Workspace. Now, many of us here have got business models that allow us to support most of the workspace through most of the workspace paying for itself. But that subsidy of the business rates relief or a cheaper building or a long lease in relationship with a local council, that can be the thing that tips our business models to be able to provide that long-term provision. That may have been quite a long answer to your question, but it was heartfelt.
So, Sue, does the LEP have money, the sort of funds to help this push this along?
It doesn't have funds, no. It's doing all it can to help, and we are looking at innovative ways to support the industry, but there isn't this magical fund of money called the London LEP Fund that can help this. Everything we do and deliver has to have a return of investment. We do not have any money that we can just give out per se for grants. There are EU funding that we can access that wouldn't be available into the system if it wasn't done through the LEP. And that's a different structure of getting money, and that has its whole minefield of filling in forms and bureaucratic ways around it. But the GLA are brilliant at doing that, and they're a godsend because it absolutely leaves me baffled. But we are very, very keen as a London LEP to help this open workspace thing go forward, because we think it is good for London, we think it's healthy for London. We don't want to see it disappear, but the trouble is we are in a market force economy, and therefore it is really hard. You know, I had to move from Old Street because I had a 500% increase in my business rent, on top of a 300% increase in my business rates. It's just not sustainable to have an 800% increase in your fixed property costs. That's just not. Now, I moved to South Quay, paying my Old Street old rent. The person next to me, he got to his rent review and he'd been paying his South Quay rent. He then found that he had to move to Chelmsford to find a similar piece of property he can afford. And this is what's happening, is people move from the West End out to Clerkenwell paying their West End rents. The Clerkenwell people are moving to Old Street paying their Clerkenwell rents. And everybody's been forced out because market forces is just at the moment hitting the same point as it did with residential, where there's lack of commercial space, the land values are so high, and the costs, some of it's greedy landlords, but some of it is just pure economics of what's happening. And as I say, the next mayor and whoever is in charge of London in the councils have got to make some very grown-up decisions. Do we have some form of saying that we want in the London plan to have micro and small business communities inside zones 1 to 6? And if we do, how are we going to make that happen?
But isn't that what planning's all about, Matthew? Because, Sue, you were only able to work in Old Street because the clockmaker's been moved out by the youth classes orders, and now PD is actually perhaps going back to what it was before the youth class order, but we don't like the impact that's having. But isn't the planning system strong enough, Matthew, to help you control the value, the price of space, so that you can deliver to those people you want to?
I don't know. I'm not a planner. I do think youth classes is an interesting thing to look at, actually, because I'm not sure whether the youth class system or the business rates legislation has kind of kept pace with the evolution of the workspace sector. And I think, you know, what we're talking about today is very distinct from your kind of typical, you know, open market B1A space. And you know, for me, there isn't a use class at the moment that kind of captures what a lot of these spaces are. And I also think if you look at business rates legislation, the small business rates relief is another example that's not kind of serving this sector properly either. I mean, you've got a policy where if you're a small business in your own distinct office, if it's of a certain size under a certain rateable value, then you get 100% or 50% rate relief. If you're choosing to go into, you know, a membership environment in a co-working space or something similar, then the space that you're occupying is probably tiny and way below those thresholds. But the way that the rules are written means that neither your kind of landlord or you as a business, as a member in one of those spaces, is getting the benefit of any rate relief. So as well as looking at you know, the issue of charitable mandatory relief, I also think we need to look at the issue of small business rate relief and whether that can be adjusted to take account of open workspaces. But yeah, I mean, I think going back to the point about planning, I think use classes is something to look at. There are tools that planners can use clearly, but this issue of permitted development rights is a major one. I mean, I think it doesn't sound like the government's going to change tack on it anytime soon. Yeah, but I think it is worth remembering that that there is an exemption in place in parts of central London.
Yeah.
And if you look at the GLA's research and this IPPR emerging work, a lot of these spaces are in central London. And I think people within the sector and property owners and developers in the centre need to kind of keep on making the case to keep that exemption in place.
Great. Michael?
Yeah, I think first of all to say grants are pretty much a disaster for the whole kind of mentality that you get into in developing your business model. It's kind of creates an unreal relationship to the world that we're operating in. But that said, I think it's self-evident that we do indeed need a planning system which is going to enable us to hang on to space as new developments happens. And I think that can happen strategically in the London plan in terms of privileging retention of space in central London. At the borough level, Southwark, I think, have got some really good models coming forward. The Legacy Development Corporation are doing some really innovative things with planning in relation to Hackney Wick and Fish Island. I also think that loans, the idea of loan guarantee, in San Francisco, there is a system whereby the public sector underwrites loans. So I think we can make the model work. What we can't do, what we're not good at yet, what we need to learn is to kind of get our access to credit straight. With the right credit, then I think with a loan system, with underwriting by the public sector, we could do some really good things. And finally, I'd say, in relation to property development, we've come from an environment in which we've basically, made good with cheap space in that kind of a, bottom-up fashion. But I think we need to turn it on its head. From a property development point of view, rather than us being beholden to property developers, where we're effectively taking space that they've been forced to make in a new development. So we're the kind of afterthought. We need to make development happen where the development is for us, and then we make the profitable bits work in our favour. But that's a kind of journey, isn't it? That's about the maturity of us all and our sector to begin to get those new models in place.
Thanks. So just go to Sarah, but as soon as Sarah's done, then we'll come to the floor for a few questions. So Sarah.
It's really about trying to find a typology for inner and outer London that works for workspace provision with housing on top that funds it. And what we tend to get actually is Costa Coffee or Tesco Extra that has been told that we've been told it's going to be workspace, it's ground floor, it's full plate glass, nobody wants to sit there, no one wants to work there. It's been designed by an agent for a fantasy client, quite often gets retrofitted back into housing. Seen lots of nods and smiles. On PD, I think where we are with the Workspace group is we went and had a chat with CLG and said, look, this is the impact you're having on this small but important part of the world we call London. And they said, oh dear, okay, well, we're not going back on PD, but you do need to start telling us what can happen. And we said, well, we've heard this rumour that the exemptions are going to end. And they said, no, they're not going to end, but what we're going to do is stop just giving blanket exceptions for general reasons. What we need is really specific requests for very particular areas for very particular reasons. So what we're trying to do is put together the tools for not just us, but for everyone to be able to do that. So that's the other part of this value research. One part of the value research is to have interesting conversations with developers, with local authorities, but the other part of it is to be able to say to local authorities, this is the value of open workspace provision. Please make sure this is in your local plans. To the London Mayor, this is the value of open workspace provision. Please make sure this is in the London plan. And this is how you test and measure it, because you need to make the case for this exemption.
Thanks. We've got a question now.
Hi, yeah, Max Titchmarsh, architect. It's just a question following on from the use class debate and the supply issue, because nobody wants a wholly subsidised industry. So where's the supply coming from? And we all know how difficult it is to get a new use class, and there are already 8 subdivisions within the B use class anyway. So it's a question about where the supply is coming from. Obviously TfL with their arsenal of railway arches have a role to play, but D1 is an interesting one. Lots of local authorities have a blanket policy against loss of D1. It's intended to protect community uses. Very often it just protects fringe religious uses. They're amazing churches, community halls, spaces that are ideal for incubator space. So there's a question about that, and it's whether incubator space, particularly that has business support, leans towards a D1 use class, or alternatively, whether local authorities take a slightly more interesting view on overlap consents between D1 and B1 if it relates to incubator space. So it's sort of twofold question.
Anyone like to comment on that? Matthew?
I'll go, yeah. Where I worked previously at Westminster, I tried to sort of have a debate with the planners on this B1, D1 issue. There are open workspaces that have been highlighted in the GLA's report, good examples that people know about, that are in, classified as D1. So there are precedents, but there are many more that are B1, and of course, planners understandably, are swayed a lot by precedent, and so I think it's a difficult argument to make that these spaces are D1 if they've got a bit of business support in them. I think it would be just a good argument to make, and it has some validity, particularly with the spaces that really go the extra mile on business support services. I mean, some spaces have, their own loan products for businesses within their own mentoring programs, particular sector accelerators within the spaces, and I think those spaces, sure, could be classified as D1, but for every one of those, there are probably 10 that are just kind of a typical kind of B1 space. You mentioned the issue about supply and TfL and railway arches and stuff, and I think going from Westminster to Lambeth, one of the first things I've noticed in the first few months is just how much underutilised space there could be in central London still. And I think it could be a really, really interesting thing to look at a London level, and just kind of highlight some good examples where overlooked spaces have been transformed, and what can be done to kind of bring forward spaces that have been overlooked, that are kind of difficult sites that carry very low or little value.
Great. Sue?
I mean, TfL at the moment have an exercise looking at all their commercial property. And they are very much now going for market forces top end, either upgrading what they're doing or whatever. We've got a massive battle on at Brixton for exactly this issue. So TfL, I don't think, is your panacea answer on this, because they are going to be very expensive upgraded property. I mean, part of it is got to come back to, if you take the Bishop's Goodyard, you're taking a lot of very small archy type space, and then the new plan that is on the cards that's going to probably get through is very large footprinted, as you said, glass fronted units aimed at the Costa Coffees, your Primarks and everything else. You can see almost the shop name on the plan that the architect's drawn up of who it's been actually designed for. So all those small micro businesses are going to be forced out of there, and you're going to get this carbon copy of just 2 minutes down the road at Liverpool Street of all the same shops coming in.
Yeah. James?
Just going to pick up on the support element to that question. Is when we talk to our customers, we've got 4,000 customers who have a tenancy with us, and there's another 1,000 or so that will pass through our club workspace model every year. And the number one concern that our customers have, as they tell us, is access to finance. And fundamentally, if we want to have open workspaces as a success story, it's not about the point of entry, but actually more likely the point of exit from those open workspaces and how they can progress in a sustainable manner. And I think if you start to look at how much people actually understand about the financing for growth, it's quite an underdeveloped part of our market here in the UK, when you mention points about what's happening over in the US. So we're trying to introduce the concepts to our new and growing customers as much as possible, introducing relationships with their organisations like Informed Funding, who do not make any money from, they're not a broker, but what they do is they go in and they sit with our customers and they understand their finances, they understand what they're looking to fund, and they look at the different types of funding that's available. And then another key element is actually, well, if you're really funding for growth, then how do you have access to capital? And here it's important to be, considering all different types of alternative finance, particularly if you're a new and growing company as well. And so bringing into play the crowdfunding elements to it. So Seeders come into our portfolio quite a lot and talk to our customers, and the first $1 million raise on Seeders in the UK was a customer who started in Club Workspace, met his business partner in Club Workspace, started the model, and hit the first $1 million funding. But then there are also some extremely interesting models that are emerging specifically out of the open workspace environment. And if you were to look at someone like Entrepreneur First, who specialise in tech startups, they fund the individual. They don't fund a business per se. They fund the individual. They form a business relationship with these individuals, introduce them to other people. And what's most important about what Entrepreneur First do is the cohort progress every 6 months through their system, and to actually introduce them to Series A funding. And once you start to get your Series A funding, then you have the ability to scale. And there are some stories in there, $100 million companies coming out of this type of incubation program. And you're seeing miraculous growth. And what obviously we'd like to see how these companies move out of co-working space and move into either their own office, that they've raised enough money they could be buying, or saying, okay, I have now this financial stability to move from 5 people, I know I need to get to 50 people, and I'm prepared to make a commitment to that. And that's really where everything has to be sustainable for this growth.
Thank you very much. We ought to finish in a moment. We've got one question there, one question. We take those two together and then we'll answer them, and we need to stop. So this one here first. Yeah. You say who you are.
So, Simon Pitt-Keithley. I run a business improvement district in Camden Town. My question to the panel is really, how far do you think you can cast the net in trying to solve this problem? In my business improvement district, we run a co-working space called Camden Collective, because we recognise that if 100 micro businesses employ one more person, the value to the local economy is great. We know that 80% of London's startups fail within the first 3 years. If we could reduce that to 75%, that has a huge benefit to the economy. But that's a big cohort of people involved in that value chain. How can we bring more of them in to help solve a problem like this?
Thank you very much. Them?
My question is picking up on Sue's point about what I call the genericizing of space at the scale of Bishopsgate Goods Yard. There is the same sort of risk further down the value chain that you get, for example, in Club Workspace. You're getting a generic type of space that doesn't cater to the guy who, silver plates components of jewellery that form a very important part of an economic cluster. So I'm interested to know what the panel's view is in protecting more diverse spaces within the open workspace model.
Thanks very much. So who'd like to start off with a response to one or other of those? Yes, Michael.
Well, on how far can you cast the net? I mean, we run a digital platform called Artist Studio Finder. It's like a kind of like a dating service, if you will, between people who want space and people who provide it, and that gets something like 10,000 hits a month. And so our that's across the sector, of course, but from our kind of working understanding so far is that there is a huge demand for space that we can't currently meet, and that makes us confident to take risks. So moving out of Barking, for example, looking at the sort of the wrong end of Lewisham and those kinds of decisions. You need somebody to help you take the risk on the price points when you do that. But I think from a demand point of view, there's a lot of it.
Okay, we ought to stop in a minute. So carry on the other panel.
It's much more than just physical space. It's about all the things we need: access to finance, and business support, and everything else. There is a tool coming which I think might go quite a way towards it, which is obviously the London Growth Hub website, where we've been very, very keen in London to make it a working website that's going to help businesses, not by reinventing the wheel, but actually putting a signpost together where everything is out there, so people then have one point of access to go to. So hopefully it's not going to be the only solution, but it's a move in the right place. The other thing is people starting to working together. We all work in isolation. The FSB is doing some great work. The London Chamber is doing some great work.
So who's the FSB?
Federation of Small Businesses.
Right, okay.
So, we're all doing great work, but we're all doing it in silos. So somehow or other, we need to start better working together for a greater London.
Thanks. Sarah, do you want a final comment?
maybe we didn't address your point, which is a bit about if we provide laptop land, then that doesn't work for everybody. I think we've got 3 providers up here, and I do sort of a bit of laptop land, a bit of not laptop land. You do mostly not laptop land. You do mostly laptop land.
A lot of laptop land.
So we've tried to have diversity on the panel for just that consideration, because I think that it does come back to is the cost of space. And the cost of space when you are a woman and a lathe and a planer and a thicknesser and is a lot higher than when you're a man or a woman with a laptop. And so that's kind of where I was going with my comment about there are certain sectors that if we want to see them exist, those sectors may need longer term subsidised.
Great. Okay, well, we should draw things to close now. So I'd like to thank our panel very much.